You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. We certainly appreciate you guys coming by the show today. Today, we're going to be talking about the mind. The Malady of the Mind, Schizophrenia and the Path to Prevention. We have the author of the newest book out, February 21st, 2023. It just came out. Jeffrey A. Lieberman is going to be on the show with us today. We're going to talk about maladies of the mind, specifically his book, Schizophrenia, and other different things. We're going to talk about a few different things, narcissism, psychiatry, mental illness, and pretty much everything about Chris Voss there is to know, because as you know, as my audience for 13 years, I might not be straight in the brain. But he's going to decide if I have any help or not, or if I should probably have a frontal lobotomy. Anyway, as always, we refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives. We love all the great referrals and things that you put on iTunes with those 5-star reviews saying how great the show is and how much it helps you expand your mind. And that's the great thing about this show. If you're smarter, you're sexier in life, and you'll make more money and everything else. Those aren't guaranteed. The lawyer said I can't guarantee those in any way, shape, or form. But I can just kind of make stuff up, because that's what we do on the show. Anyway, guys, I'm kidding. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss, goodreads.com/Chris Voss, the big LinkedIn newsletter, the big LinkedIn group, all the stuff that we do across social media. Check that out as well. As I mentioned, he's the author of the latest book, Malady of the Mind, Schizophrenia and the Path to Prevention. You can order it wherever fine books are sold, but stay away from those alleyway bookstores, because you might need a tetanus shot. I tripped in one the other day, and I've got some gangrene, but I'll have to get another doctor on the show for that. Anyway, Jeffrey Lieberman is a professor and Constance and Stephen Lieber Chair in the Psychiatry at the Columbia University Vantage College of Physicians and Surgeons. Throughout his 40-year career, he has focused on research and clinical care of patients with serious mental illness. Might be his next case. In addition to his academic and clinical activities, he has played a significant role in influencing government and social policy. In fact, if anybody needs mental health, it's people in government, and not all people, I should say, just maybe some of those senators and House members, in my opinion, that is. Let's see. He's played a significant role in influencing government and social policy, educating health care providers and the public in an effort to reduce stigma and improve access to and quality of mental health care. Welcome to the show, Jeffrey Lieberman. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me, Chris.
Thanks for coming. It's an honor to have you. We love having brilliant minds on the show, because I'm not one of them. Give us a .com so people can find you on the interwebs, please, sir.
It's JeffreyLiebermanMD.com. That's my website URL.
There you go. So this is, I think, your second, or how many books do you have in there?
Well, I've written, believe it or not, 800 scientific articles.
Holy crap.
I've written 17 books for professional doctors and scientists, but this is my second book for the public.
There you go. So the public can indulge in this. So what motivated you to write your latest book here, Malady of the Mind?
Well, I had never written for the lay public before, and then I realized that, if you have an illness, you want to know what the cause is and what the treatment is. And what I came to realize after sort of stepping out of the ivory tower of academia, where you're doing your research and discovering all these new things, was that the problem with mental, if you get sick, if you have cancer, let's say you're a woman and you feel a lump and you go to a hospital and they diagnose you and they say, oh, we have breast cancer and we believe you need a lumpectomy and a chemotherapy and radiation. And you can pretty much get that most places, not everywhere. If you have a mental illness, people don't understand what it is to begin with, how to recognize it, and they're not sure where to go to get treatment for it. And the treatment isn't widely available. And so it was like, okay, we've got vaccines for COVID, or we've got, vaccines for polio, or we've got, treatment for diabetes, but it's not available. People don't know what kind of doctors to go to. In fact, when I wrote my first book in 2015, it was called Shrinks, The Untold Story of Psychiatry. I started off with an epigram from Samuel Goldwyn, of the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, who said, anybody that sees a psychiatrist needs to have their head examined. And that said to me that psychiatry, my chosen specialty, was the Rodney Dangerfield of medical specialties, meaning it didn't get any respect. And I feel that that is untrue, and it is to the detriment of people who may suffer from mental disorders and need treatment, which is available, but they either don't believe in it, they don't know where to find it, or they're not sure if they actually have something that requires searching for it.
Yeah, it's something that people need to adhere to more. And so why did you specifically decide to write about schizophrenia when there's so many other wonderful maladies people can have in their brain, like mine?
Well, schizophrenia is the poster child of mental illnesses. So first of all, let's make a distinction, Chris. There's a distinction between mental illnesses and the worried well. That's my, kind of glib term for the ups and downs of daily life, the vicissitudes of one's emotional state, in relation to their work or their home life, or how things are going for them socially and so forth. Everybody has variations in their mood, in their ability to concentrate and focus, and how they perceive things. But they're able to sort of keep it within bounds and eventually sort of stabilize in a tolerable mental condition where they can function and they're not in mental distress. I mean, except if you're living in Ukraine right now under war conditions, or you've got a death in your family that's causing you to grieve. But mental illness is when you have a disturbance in thinking, emotion regulation, perception that goes beyond whatever your circumstances are, persists for not just a few minutes or a few hours, but weeks or months, and causes disability. You're not able to function well, and causes distress. And although there are many mental disorders, and we're not talking about the kind of questionable things about internet gaming disorder or something like that. We're talking about schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, melancholic depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, addiction, autism, dementia. The one that people probably have the most vivid impression of is schizophrenia, because schizophrenia is the equivalent of insanity, madness, lunacy. It's the homeless person in the street in the middle of winter standing there with no shoes in the snow. It's the figure that's portrayed in a movie, whether it's Psycho or Shutter Island or something like that. And it's the scary, mysterious, figure that people fear, even serial killers. When I first began training in psychiatry, I came to New York in late 1970s, and Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, was a serial killer on the loose. And the Unabomber came afterwards. Now, this is not to say that people with schizophrenia are very violent, but these types of individuals who are mentally ill and resort to these kinds of behaviors get tremendous attention because the media knows that these stories are sensational and they get eyes on and ratings. And so it's in the public's mind. And I wanted to dispel the mystery and also the pessimism that, you're doomed from the womb if you have that condition, that there is treatment for you, and it's even actually preventable.
And probably important to seek help if you feel that you have it, or maybe a loved one is suffering from it, right?
You want to know something, Chris? If you have chest pain that turns out to be angina or a heart attack, you may delay going to see a doctor, going to the hospital, but it's probably not more than a few days or maybe in weeks. The average amount of time from when a person, and this usually occurs between a certain window, late adolescence and early adulthood, 15 to 25, that's when the onset occurs. When people begin to experience symptoms to when they actually see a mental health professional and get diagnosed, is over a year.
Wow.
So there's a lot of delay during which bad stuff can happen before anybody comes to the possibility of treatment.
And why is that? Is there some sort of, do we need to start, addressing mental illness more in this country, where we need to say, hey man, get some help right away. Don't wait.
Absolutely. But first of all, the fact that the period of onset, the window of onset age-wise, just like Alzheimer's disease doesn't occur till you're elderly, or autism occurs in the first 24 years of life. Schizophrenia's period of onset is 15 to 25 by and large.
Wow.
But that's a period that people are going through changes. As an adolescent, you're experimenting with things, you're maturing, you're developing your own identity, you're becoming independent. And it's hard to know what are just the normal fluctuation of kids going through those maturational stages, and what are the harbingers of an imminent mental illness like schizophrenia. So, parents and pediatricians and others are they are giving people slack, thinking, oh, they're going through a phase, which is true. The other thing is that people don't know what to look for. They don't know what the prodromal or the warning signs are. If you are experiencing pain in your chest, that radiates down your arm, you might think, oh, is it just heartburn, or maybe it's I bumped myself and it's my rib attaching to my sternum, or maybe it's the beginning symptoms of coronary artery disease.
Yeah.
So you can narrow it down, but when it comes to aberrant behavior, it's very difficult because it overlaps with what is normative behavior. So that's why it's difficult. And then even if people do think that there's something serious going on that they need to pay attention to, then they think, well, where do I go? Do I go to my GP? Do I go to my clergyman? Do I go to a psychologist, a social worker, a therapist? Do I go to some kind of holistic retreat? There's this fuzzy notion about what mental health care is. And it's not just being nice to people. It's not just listening when people say things that are distressing them. It's going to a mental health professional that can make a distinction between what's a serious indication of the beginning of a mental disorder, or what is something that's just more of this kind of normal fluctuations in mental state in relation to your current life circumstances.
Yeah, and I would say also see a professional, as you've just stated. Don't consult with social media.
Oh,
absolutely. I see a lot of social media professionals that are, I don't know, they don't have jobs or something, so they decided that's what they are on social media, and they're giving a lot of psychological advice, which can, it's just throwing darts at, I don't know.
I'm afraid you hit on a very big emerging problem. That is that, first of all, anybody can hang out a shingle and say they're a therapist. And you have to have a certain credential. You need to be licensed, a licensed psychologist, licensed social worker, licensed physician. But anybody can say they're a therapist. And the other thing is that because of the lack of mental health care facilities, meaning clinics, mental health professionals from psychiatrists, psychologists, psychiatric nurses, because of the gap, it's being filled by companies that think digital technology is the answer. And you're going to be able to basically get on a phone or pull up an app and get some kind of mental health first aid, and that'll do the trick. That's not going to happen. These are basically I won't say fly-by-night ventures. They're basically commercially motivated ventures that are filling a void in our healthcare system that aren't intended to be harmful, but they're certainly not going to do the trick in terms of providing the needs to the population in terms of mental health care.
There you go. And I think, what you just spoke to, do people have an attitude that, well, this can be just a quick fix, like a physical illness? I just take a pill and, call me in the morning, doctor, sort of thing. Mental illness, takes longer to fix, doesn't it?
Absolutely. First of all, it takes more time to diagnose, longer to fix, and it's not a one and done thing. Mm-hmm. So in the book, I have many examples of clinical cases, and among the most tragic are individuals, and this is part of why I wanted to write about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a brain disorder that is caused by a certain genetic predisposition. Not one gene, but multiple genes. And it's similar to other medical conditions like type 2 diabetes, essential hypertension, that are called complex genetic medical disorders because it involves multiple genes producing additively susceptibility to the illness. But it's a particularly cruel mental illness because it comes on when people are coming into the prime of their life.
Yeah.
They're late adolescents, young adults. It can strike anybody. It's an equal opportunity disease. Men, women, all races, all geographic, ethnic groups. It can be the valedictorian, cheerleader, popular person, or you can be kind of the loner or nerd. And it comes on just as you're beginning your life. When the symptoms occur, most people have no idea what's going on. They just know, wow, this person is acting very different. I don't know what's going on, drugs, or is he having a bad day or not sleeping? And if it persists and they do get treated or hospitalized, they think, wow, I'm glad that's over. I'm going to go back to school, or I'm going to go back to what I was doing. And they want to get back to it quickly, not lose the semester. If they're taking medication, which they should be, they often are having side effects that they don't like, or they don't like the stigma of having to think they need something to keep themselves mentally stable. So they stop it, and then they relapse. And flash forward, you then begin to slide down the slippery slope of intellectual deterioration because schizophrenia is a progressive disorder. And it leads people to a chronic stage of the illness that can involve them having persistent symptoms, even in the face of treatment, and be functionally disabled. So they're not able to even come close to fulfilling whatever their potential might have been. And we see this, with people on the streets who aren't getting treatment, with people in state mental hospitals. And the real purpose, or the real bottom line, or most optimistic and important message of the book is that it doesn't have to be that the key to this dreaded, historically mysterious, misunderstood condition is early detection and intervention. You can nip it in the bud, but it has to be recognized and it has to be correctly treated.
I think you speak to something broader too, like we mentioned before. People need, if you think you need help, seek it out. Don't wait and have it looked at. I had one of my best employees, my company over the years, had a son. She had a son who had schizophrenia. And he had a lot of problems. I mean, constantly, interactions with the police and getting arrested and different things that were going on with his life and how he was behaving with schizophrenia. And he'd been diagnosed with it and lived with it for years. And to see the fallout of in her life of being a caretaker for it and people's schizophrenia was just massive. It left an indelible print on me. How much of the population is fits within the diagnosis of schizophrenia, or probably should fit in?
more than most people think. So if you talk about mental illness in general, and I'm not talking about the worried well or anything, again, I'm talking about hardcore conditions, about 20% of the population will suffer from schizophrenia or suffer from a disease in their lifetime, a mental disorder in their lifetime. Now, schizophrenia affects 1 in 100 people.
Wow.
So in the United States, that's about 3 million people.
Wow.
And it's a condition that once you've got it, you've got it for life.
Wow.
It's not like you'll get over, like get over the chicken pox or the measles. It's a recurrent condition. And if it's allowed to recur, meaning through relapses, then or not getting treated because of either neglect or disbelief, it then produces a irreversible damage in the brain that leads to mental disability.
Oh, wow.
So it's occurs young. It, if not taken care of, which it hasn't been historically optimally, it becomes disabling, but it doesn't kill you like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or ALS, other neurodegenerative diseases. It disables you. And so individuals who have it become wards of society, meaning on Medicaid, SSI disability, requiring government resources. And it also results in caregiver burden to their families, so they become estranged from them. Mm-hmm. It's very cruel. But there's one other thing, Chris, that's also an example of how our society, there's some things in life that we don't have any solutions to, or we have to find new knowledge to understand. So, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, you're just out of luck if you have that until we get a big breakthrough, or even Alzheimer's disease, or big worldwide problems, global warming, distribution of wealth, bioterrorism. Those are, we have the tools to treat schizophrenia. We have the tools to prevent somebody who's got a bright future and comes down with the illness, but doesn't understand what it is. We have the tools to prevent them from suffering the consequences of becoming a ward of society, but we don't deploy them. So our society, our government, is not serving us well and paying attention. And to make matters worse, this trend we have now with liberalizing access to what previously were recreational drugs, cannabis, psychedelics, is going to increase the frequency of schizophrenia.
Really?
Because cannabis is a trigger for people who are vulnerable to develop it.
Oh, wow.
And the incidence will definitely go up as more and more states make it easier to get.
Wow. That's interesting to note. I've met people over the years when I've met people that have usually addiction problems, their reaction to drugs is different. Like I've known people that for instance, if I drink, I get relaxed and I get very chill and I just want to be like, yeah, man. All right, cool. But I've met people that when they, especially they have an addiction to genetic addiction to alcohol, their reaction to it is completely different, like the opposite, where they become jacked up. They become very belligerent. They become problematic. They become very combatant. It's like a real opposite thing. I've seen the same thing with cocaine and different other drugs, where most people that will take it will be very, they'll have a very common reaction. But then I'll see other people that will take it in a smaller percentage, where their reaction is a complete different thing. And usually those are the people that have the problems with those sort of drugs. And it's interesting how that, I've often gone like, Jesus, how come you take this, you drink some booze and suddenly you're the biggest, loudest asshole, belligerent, and I've actually seen like a physiological change to them too, as well. I had one girlfriend who had an alcohol problem and her face would literally change. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde, which is probably where that story comes from in that sort of issue of mental illness.
Right. Well, what you're describing is the heterogeneity of, meaning the variation in pharmacologic response that people have. And that's just a biologic reality. Wow. In other words, most people have similar reactions to things. So, for example, if you take aspirin, it'll help to relieve a headache or lower your fever. Or if you take a slug of vodka, it'll make you kind of calmer and more relaxed, less anxious, more talkative, more kind of congenial. But some people react in a very different way, and they become irritable and hostile, or they fall asleep, or they become physically flushed and feel like they're uncomfortable and jumping out of their skin. But then also, if you continue to use the substance because you like it, you then develop a tolerance to it, and you need to drink or take more of it to get a similar kind of effect that you had initially. And then that leads you down the slippery slope to addiction. But if you take 100 people and if you give them, okay, well, let's take the current bad person or bad drug, OxyContin, opiate addiction. If you take 100 people and you treat them for ostensible back pain or something with OxyContin, only about a third of them are susceptible to addiction. So it's not like everyone who takes it is going to develop it, but everyone who takes it, there could be a lot of variability in it. When I take a history from a patient that I'm evaluating, as part of the routine history of their symptoms, their medical history, their family history, I also ask them about, their recreational drug use history and what is their reaction, not because I'm going to snitch on them or anything, but because how they react to things is diagnostic. And if they smoke pot and they say they get paranoid, immediately that's a tip off.
Yeah.
If you are anxious and you drink alcohol and it helps you, that's a tip off to having a general anxiety disorder or panic disorder, which alcohol is a very good anxiolytic for. The problem is it wears off and you have to drink more to keep going.
Yeah.
So what you're describing is actually a real phenomenon, and it's an important indicator of somebody's not just a reaction to that. In fact, what I say is, what's your favorite recreational drug? And if they say cocaine, so if you're susceptible to psychotic disorders and you happen to like or get into cocaine or methamphetamine or worse, you're in big trouble, because those are the major precipitants of psychosis. But the point I'm trying to make, though, is that our society, by arguing, so it's hard to say that cannabis is more dangerous than alcohol or tobacco. These are recreational intoxicants that people can have access to, and nobody, forbids them legally. On the other hand, for some people, cannabis is going to be a bad thing. And it's a bad thing if you have this susceptibility to psychotic disorder, and it's a bad thing particularly if people use it during adolescence, because then it affects your maturational development of your brain.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about this stuff, and I think more and more people. I think I'm going to start walking around with psychiatrist cards in my pocket. I can just hand them to family and friends, and I can just be like, "Get help."
So when I started writing for the for the lay media, it was hard to get people interested in a semi-scientific subject like mental illness or schizophrenia or brain function. But the one article that I wrote that had the most hits was titled "The Profession Everybody Needs But Nobody Wants."
Psychiatry is kind of like dentists, I guess, or something.
Yeah. Well, also, people have a somewhat dated view of it. They think of psychiatry as like Freud, laying on a couch, free associating, talking about your dreams and your toilet training and so forth. And that's not the current state of psychiatry.
Let me ask you this. One thing we've had a lot of authors on the show and talked a lot about is, and it's interesting to me in the life patterns of some of the people we've had on the show, but how much childhood trauma ends up, you can see the fallout through most people's life. I mean, you can see my fallout through my life in looking back. and how much childhood trauma sometimes. I heard it said one time that people that are a large part of people that are in drug rehab or had drug problems or addiction problems had childhood trauma. Do you see a lot of that with schizophrenia and other maladies? Is that a correct analysis?
Well, childhood trauma, experiential trauma, is a potentially toxic effect on the brain and on people in general. The most extreme form of it we see with soldiers in combat and PTSD. Mm-hmm. But anybody could experience it. You get mugged, or you're in a fire or an earthquake or an auto accident. Children, however, when they experience trauma, whether it's through parental abuse or any other type of catastrophic event, they handle it in a different way than adults do. And although at the time it may appear that they're pretty resilient and not acting or not seeming to have been very disturbed by the event or the repeated events, it's affecting them, and it affects them in a way that comes out later in life. So there's something called, when somebody has a diagnosis of depression, for example, meaning that they have mood disturbances, their ability to maintain a normal emotional state is disrupted, and they just can't get out of feeling horrible. I mean, this is not just, I feel sad. This is like physical pain that you can't endure. And there's some wonderful first-person accounts on this. William Styron wrote Darkness Visible. Andrew Solomon wrote The Noonday Demon. Kay Jamison wrote An Unquiet Mind. These are physically palpable pain that you feel, not just like, I didn't win at poker last night, or my girlfriend broke up with me. The notion of what something is something that people don't necessarily appreciate and understand sort of what needs to be done. But when I say, and this is to parents particularly, it's better to err on the side of caution, and seek a consultation to make sure. So, kids may have a terrible thing happen to them and they may look like normal, but then if later in life they experience the onset of an anxiety disorder or a mood disorder like depression, its ability to be treated and for them to have a good outcome is much more difficult if they have this prior traumatic experience. And there's a very large scientific literature on this. The question is, though, how do you measure trauma? Somebody can say, "Oh, I had a bad experience, with a teacher who was a bully in class, or there was a class bully in school." There's no way we can really measure trauma. So it's getting an accurate history, and then trying to evaluate what are the likely effects of that on an individual. But the key distinction, I guess I'm trying to make, is that trauma is something that can affect people at any stage of life, but it has a particularly different and onerous one in children. And the last thing I'll say about it is in some of the more extreme cases that I've seen, this is a fascinating condition that we don't know a lot about. The adult consequence of childhood trauma, whether it's emotional abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse, are conditions called dissociative states. Now, dissociative states are things where the most dramatic and extreme version of a dissociative state is multiple personality. When somebody actually can transition from the way they usually are to a totally different type of individual and act in a totally different kind of way, and frequently have no memory of it. But the more common thing is that kids who have grown up after having sustained childhood trauma in a very severe way they will have times when they will kind of dissociate, go off into another state of mind. That often has behaviors that are completely inconsistent with their normal personality. So someone who's kind of a bookish, conservative, work-oriented young woman might become, very provocative and engage in promiscuous or risky behaviors. And then this reverts back after some period of time. But it's a very dangerous condition, and it's one that we don't have good treatments for now. But you've seen movies like The Three Faces of Eve, or
Brilliant Mind.
No, Brilliant Mind.
Schizophrenia.
That was schizophrenia. Yeah, John Nash had card-carrying schizophrenia, no question, and his son has it too. So the family history is consistent with that also.
Jesus. Let's open the scope up a little bit more, because I always want our show, everybody we have on our show, we want to educate people and make them smarter with a little bit of comedy we've woven in. We talked a bit about before the show about, one of the things that concerns me is people using social media as a medical diagnosis for just about anything, whether it's being overweight or addiction or and one of the prevalences that I've seen, especially on TikTok, this has become a real big thing with TikTok. And it concerns me because, yesterday the TikTok CEO was testifying before Congress, so it's prevalent in the news. But it's so prevalent, and I see so many videos and so many quote-unquote experts that have no degree and are just armchair quarterback people who've somehow turned being coaches in diagnosing narcissism. And narcissism I've seen in recent years, especially someone who dates a lot. It seems almost like 100% of people that I date in mode right now, they will tell me that their prior boyfriends were narcissists, and the last 10 boyfriends they ever had in their life were narcissists. And it seems like it's become this communal social media narrative that 95% of the population, especially men, are narcissists. And I don't think that figure's true based on what I Google, but I shouldn't believe anything on the internet. So do you want to speak to that and why that's become such a conversation piece in our thing? Or am I giving an accurate description? Am I just insane?
No, you are. The problem is that the way narcissism is used in these instances is more as an adjective than as a diagnosis. And we've got a real problem here. How bad it'll be, we'll find out, I guess. But social media, the internet, and then social media is like catnip or cryptocurrency to personality and behavior. It gives people license to do things that they've never had before. If somebody, you could say narcissism is like egotism. He's egotistic. It's all about himself or herself. Everybody would like to be somewhat self-interested and self-serving, but we have normative limits that are called consciences or good behavior or a sense of proportion. But social media encourages people to just get outside normal boundaries because you can easily do it. You can do it semi-anonymously and don't take responsibility. You don't have to really validate or justify what you're saying or doing. You can just express your opinion or show yourself. Look at this guy, George Santos, who just made up his whole resume and everything. On the internet, you can just create your own persona, and there's no responsibility. Now, narcissism is a term that's actually, the term came from this Greek legend or story about Narcissus, who was the person who was so consumed with their own beauty or appearance that he stared at himself in a pool of water to see his image, and then ultimately drowned because he fell in. That's how the term arrived in it. But narcissism in a clinical sense means somebody who is so self-involved and self-interested that they're ignorant of other people's needs or reactions. and their relationship with other people are simply to serve their own purposes, and they're constantly self-referential in anything that happens. Like you're telling a story about, I was going into this restaurant and I saw such and such a person, and he invited me to sit down and have a drink with them. And the person says, well, yeah, the other day I was doing the same thing, and here's what happened. And so everything is self-referential. And there's an overvaluation, an over-preoccupation, and a devaluation and a lack of recognition of other individuals and other sort of external elements in the person's reality. I don't want to make any kind of political statement, but the term has gained new visibility and understanding with our former president, who was very much illustrated a lot of those kinds of behaviors. So narcissism is considered what's called a personality disorder, meaning it's psychologic as opposed to biologic. It's not the brain so much as it is the person's personality from the way they've been raised and whatever they've inherited from their parents that may also have been inclined of that sort. But I think your observation is accurate, is that the internet has encouraged this expression more. And there's one other thing that I think is definitely relevant. And that gets back to the culture thing I was saying, and the pathoplastic features that can encourage pathology from the cultural environment. America is a country that was built on the ethos of a rugged individualist who is there for personal freedom, self-determination, master of their own destiny. And so, there's a cultural ethos of encouraging people to express their individualism. And in doing so, and now with the internet, they can express their individualism in this way that provides access and anonymity. The problem is that you can reduce it to kind of, I guess I would say, individual narcissistic immaturity. In other words, a kid just yells, "I want this," or "I want that," or "Look at me," or "I want to go here." With the internet, the country sort of encourages people to fulfill their dreams, live their own lives, be individualists as opposed to conformists and adhering to convention, and to do it without any kind of encumbrances or inhibitions. That's what kids do. That's not what adults who are responsible members of society do. So you're right. There is this proliferation of narcissistic behaviors and then faux diagnoses being leveled at people, not because they have the disorders, but because they're behaving in that way. But our society is encouraging it, both from our historical culture as well as this more recent advent of the internet, which is social media.
Yeah, it's I'm pulling this up with I think this is from the Cleveland Clinic. A common narcissistic personality disorder is up to 5% of people that have, it's estimated, and is one of 10 personality disorders. There's another report that males may have it up to 7.7% in general population, 4.8 females. But my concern is that I see, like, I'm trying to pull it up on TikTok here. There are billions of views about narcissism on social media, and you see people talk about it, and I agree with you. We saw some of the psychiatrists groups write books about the narcissism of President Trump, and it's not political. I mean, this is definitely something that you look at and you go, well, it kind of brought the discussion. And I'm looking at the term narcissist, the hashtag on TikTok alone. It's 8.5 billion views. And there's not that many people in the frickin' world, people.
Right. So somebody's attributing a diagnosis that they probably have to more people than actually exist.
Exactly. It's insane. I looked down the list of narcissism hashtag just on TikTok alone, and I can't go any day on TikTok without seeing some person claiming that they're narcissists, and then all their prior boyfriends or girlfriends are narcissism. And what's interesting to me is also there is a state of men and women relations of dark triadism, of why women are attracted to men with dark triad traits and why they want men to lead. And there's the biology of why women are attracted to that sort of thing, a narcissist, physical sort of thing. If you study hybristophilia and why women are attracted to people of hybristophilia that are prisoners or death row inmates, like I've seen that where I'm like, how come the guy, at one point, what's his face was getting married, the guy who killed a bunch of people with the gang, the cult, and Charles Manson was getting married. And I'm like, how come Charles Manson has a girlfriend and I don't? Like, what the hell's going on with that? But the only reason I'm talking about this is I just want to bring a light to people that please don't use social media as a psychological diagnosis. Please go see a medical professional. Please go see someone with a degree. Social media has become really weird. Like anything that's the topic of the week, everyone's a professional expert on it suddenly. Like, when the Chinese balloons were getting shot out of the sky, suddenly everybody in my social media feed was the ultimate professional on, with years of experience on what Chinese balloons are in the sky.
It's a little bit like, the legend of Prometheus. Prometheus discovers fire, and fire can be used for good or bad purposes. The internet was an amazing discovery, but this purpose is a double-edged sword. But, let me just give you, there's different kinds of what might be called narcissistic behavior. There's good narcissism, there's bad narcissism. So bad narcissism is somebody who's so self-involved and self-consumed that that's all they ever think about. It's no one else, nothing else. It's just all about them. Good narcissism is somebody, let's say, who has a messianic, sort of attitude or motivation. They think so highly of themselves. I'm so smart and I'm so capable and I have a mission and I'm going to save the world. And they actually go out and try and do that. But, in a sincere way, well-intended, not solely to bring attention to themselves, but to be the person that can do good for the world, and they'll get the credit for it, or they'll be able to bring it about. That's kind of a grandiose narcissism, which is good. And then a third kind is what...
Describe me there, I should mention.
Well, there you go. There you go. Well, you're doing...
a little bit.
Depends on your guests and your podcast, I guess. The people with schizophrenia are also defined by a narcissistic quality. It's one that doesn't hurt anybody except themselves. They're so consumed with their own symptoms, their delusions, their hallucinations. They're trying to figure out what is going on in their head or in their world because it's at variance with the external reality. They're creating their own reality because their psychotic symptoms are so intense that they take them as being, the gospel truth, the absolute reality that's going on, even though, there's not really people after them, even though the CIA hasn't put a computer chip in their body, even though that the neighbors aren't trying to poison them, even though the voices they're hearing aren't real voices of people who are saying bad things about them. There's really different forms of this, but I personally think about the social media is there should be more curation of it. But then you've got free speech, then you've got freedom of expression. That's not always good. And I don't know what the answer is, but there should be some curation that, and people say, well, that's censorship. Well, it's not necessarily bad to make sure that stuff that gets posted has some, legitimacy to it and is not overtly offensive.
You bring up a really good point that I think I'm going to become an advocate for. We had this thing during COVID where they would, social media companies would put like a disclaimer, Like any author we had on talking about COVID or whatever on YouTube, there's like a little disclosure that will come up about COVID and, health risks and, you should be careful what sort of information you're looking at. I think they need to do this on social media and like TikTok. Like if someone's talking about a medical diagnosis, whether it's physical or mental in psychology cases, for instance, what we discussed about with narcissism or any sort of other malady that some amateur quarterback, armchair quarterback has decided they're the expert on this week, there should be like some sort of thing that says like, this person has some interesting freedom of expression ideas, but please, if you really want to study narcissism, get professional help. And I think maybe there should be a disclosure of that maybe more often.
Well, that I think runs into our political ethos. This thing about government staying out of people's lives, even though that isn't the case. And so you can't have it both ways. But narcissism, a fundamental element of our narcissism is immaturity. Because all children are narcissistic. All children are narcissistic, and you grow out of that. You grow out of that as a result of peer pressure, cultural norms, and being incentivized or disincentivized to conduct yourself in different ways. If you act like a bore that only talks about yourself, people are going to run away from you.
Oh, you just described me, so.
Well, you've got a pretty good listening audience, so I don't think it's working in a negative way for you.
They're here for the car crash. They're just waiting for me to hit the wall. That's what I'm told. They're just like they're watching, going any day now. He's going to hit it.
Right, like a Formula One race, huh?
Pretty much, yeah. Let me ask you about one more thing before we wrap up the show, because I know we've gone pretty long, but I think this is an important discussion for people, because the main message of the show I want to take and do is people should buy your book and understand psychology more, but also seek professional help. There's been 2 times in my life where my depression and anxiety have gotten so bad where I had to go get chemicalized and get some help, and they were the best things for me because I was becoming very self-destructive. You alluded earlier in the show about gaming disorders and maladies that maybe not quite reaching the level of and in the cases I'm sure different variant, but there's been a lot of interesting things that's come out of psychology lately where there's been some criticism of how it seems to be expanding quite a bit of different maladies. Like you mentioned gaming disorder. I know one malady that I'm not excited about is evidently some psychiatrists determined that masculinity is toxic and is a mental disease, or suggested it was a mental disease, or implied that it was. Is that happening in the world? Are we really generating more diagnoses or more mental illnesses, or is maybe woke culture getting a little out of control with just making everything a disease? Kind of like what I'm seeing with narcissism. A lot of people that I see declare, that their prior relationship persons were narcissism is really just them not taking self-accountability and going, hey, maybe it's me. Because it's always me. I know it's me, but.
So I was president of the American Psychiatric Association in 2013 and 14 when the current, or the most current version of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is the Bible of Diagnoses, was launched. And there was a lot of controversy and criticism about proliferating diagnoses and pathologizing normal behavior. And from a clinical medical standpoint, I can tell you that is not happening, and that is not the goal or the intent. When somebody talks about toxic masculinity, they're basically engaging in an ideological strategy to call attention to something that they feel is pernicious or want to, and so they're weaponizing a clinical diagnosis as a way to do it. Just like now, with cancel culture, we've weaponized certain things that are called microaggressions or implicit bias to take out people. So this is not, but on the other hand, and this is important, although I don't know how to say it in a few words, throughout history, as medicine evolved, all diseases were recognized and described and diagnosed in the same way, meaning the first thing that was done was to describe them. So people that had epilepsy had falling sickness, like Caesar. People that had congestive heart failure had dropsy, meaning that they had edema in their ankles, fluid dropped to their legs. People that had diabetes the doctor tasted their urine. If it was sweet, it was mellitus. If it was watery, it was insipidus. But then when science and technology were developed, you could measure glucose, you could do EKGs, you could do EEGs. And so you had a laboratory diagnosis of the condition. And then the third level is, can you discover the actual cause? I have pneumococcal pneumonia. I can actually grow the bacteria in culture. Or I have Huntington's disease. I can identify the gene that causes the symptoms of the disorder. Mental illnesses are still at the first level, describing the symptoms. Narcissism is acting in the way that we've described. Schizophrenia is based on the occurrence of delusions, hallucinations, thought disorganization. Depression is sadness and sleep disturbance and worry beyond the scope of the person's circumstance. So we're still doing it phenomenologically. So it's easy prey to say, masculinity is toxic, or to say that sexual addiction by somebody who's a womanizer or a manizer, and seeks a lot of sexual partners. It's just descriptive, but it's an opinion. It's not actual evidence that's doing it. And as you've been referring to, the internet gives people a bigger voice than they've ever had before to be able to do it. So let me just say, because I know that we need to wrap up, that if people are wondering, if they listen to this, I need to be more sensitive to my family members and friends' behavior, and if I recognize something that I'm concerned about, what should I do? The guidance is this: be over-involved, not under-involved. And you start at the top when you seek help, meaning you go to a psychiatrist, and preferably at an academic teaching center first. And then you can work your way down, if it's not anything serious, to a therapist that they can refer you to. But the point is that people, if somebody is drinking too much, if somebody is acting bizarre, if somebody appears morose and talks about life not being worth living, they usually feel uncertain what to do, what to say. It's not my business, and I don't want to say anything that's going to be, taken the wrong way. Say something. Mm-hmm. By asking, you'll never push anybody in the direction of something bad happening. It's better to ask than to stay silent.
Definitely. I love that as a PSA, and that's what I was planning on wrapping the show with. What's the best way for people, the quickest way to reach out? Because as you mentioned before, people can wait too long to get help. I've been guilty of that. In fact, that people, they'll ask on social media, they'll be like, if you could go back to your childhood self and teenage self and tell yourself a word of wisdom, what would it be? I'm like, go get psychological help, Chris Voss. Go get some help now. Childhood trauma, and looking back through 50 years of childhood trauma and seeing the wreckage is not good. Don't be me. And a lot of people suffer from that. So what's the best way to reach out if you think you need help, or if you have a loved one that you think you need help? Should you hand them a card? Should you get them a phone number? What's the best way to kind of make that decision and cross that line so you don't wait?
Well, I try and do what I can to respond or guide people. And if you go to my website, jeffreyliebermanmd.com, that's a way to connect to myself. But, people live in all kinds of geographic areas and different circumstances. If best thing to do initially is to ask your GP for a referral. If they say, well, God, I don't know any psychiatrists or none that I trust, then I would call the medical school and the office of the chair of psychiatry and say, I'm having anxiety, I'm having a drinking problem, a drug problem, depression, whatever. Who on your faculty is the specialists in this area that I could see? and to go that way. There's also the American Psychiatric Association, which have local branches in each city. But you may have to search because, like I said initially, the access and availability is just not comparable to general medical care or other medical specialty care. And there's one other thing I'll say, Chris, that I feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I think it's just so true that I should say it. Do you know anybody that goes to the second best doctor? Everybody thinks to go to the best doctor. So there's good doctors and there's less good doctors. But when it comes to psychiatry, there's more variability, and that's because the field is still, was the late bloomer of medical specialties. So you have to do a little bit of searching sometimes, but people do that. When you have cancer and you don't get a good response from the initial treatment, people go online, they look at protocols in different places, they'll travel. I'm not suggesting you have to do that, but you may have to do a little work. But a lot of what I do is re-diagnosing people or changing the treatment regimens from bad ones to the correct ones. So you may have to put some effort in, but it's worth it. Because when it comes to severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia, it's definitely a situation in which a stitch in time saves 9.
Yeah. And don't wait, people. And don't consult with TikTok and social media. Seek professional help. Please quit hiring and paying people and listening to people that, they just decided last week they're the professional in this. Deal with professionals, people who've studied this, gone to college, gotten degrees, et cetera, et cetera. Please stop using social media as a way to...
The best physicians don't have a lot of time to spend doing that. I can tell you that.
There's a good point. So please reach out. I encourage everyone, and don't wait. I can cite some examples in my life, but we don't have enough time right now. But there's times where I've dealt with anxiety and depression in my business life, and get help as soon as possible. Reach out if you think you need help. It doesn't hurt. And you're actually a better person for going, hey, maybe I need help. Let's take a look down that journey. Maybe you don't. But it's better to be introspective in that way than just think that you're the perfect human being in the world, which is, what I do. Anyway,
don't try and tough it out, and don't be cowed by stigma.
There you go. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for coming on the show. We really appreciate coming on, giving some insight, and hopefully we've opened some minds and educated some people, and we can save some lives.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thank you very much.
There you go. Order up the book, folks. Wherever fine books are sold, stay away those alleyway bookstores because they're dirty. So go to the good ones. I don't know what that means. I'm just kidding around. Anyway, guys, Malady of the Mind, Schizophrenia and the Path to Prevention. It's out on hardcover, paperback, audiobook, and Kindle, and audio CD, wherever fine books are sold. February 21st, 2023. Jeffrey A. Lieberman has been on the show with us today. And as always, we enjoy our audience tuning in and some of the great comments we get. Be sure to go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time. And that should